The first time my family tried to erase me, it was subtle, a missed invitation, a story retold without my part in it. By the time my father's memorial came, they didn't even hide it. My sister was ready to capture my humiliation on camera, certain I'd crack under the weight of her performance. She didn't know I'd spent my life living in two worlds, one where I was the quiet daughter they dismissed, and another where my word could move an entire SEAL team into action. What happened that day shattered years of lies, silenced the people who'd spoken over me, and proved that family isn't about blood. It's about who will stand for you when the world is watching. If you've ever been underestimated, silenced, or erased, this is your story too. Hit subscribe to ErasedMe and stay until the end. You'll want to see how one word changed everything. The smell of roast chicken mingled with Chloe's designer perfume, a heady mix that made the dining room feel smaller than it was. The chandelier's golden light spilled over a polished mahogany table, catching on the rim of crystal glasses. My father, towering at the head, held his glass aloft. His voice boomed in the way it always did when he wanted the world to know just how proud he was. "To Chloe," he declared, his tone rich with admiration, "for closing the Parkhurst deal and proving, once again, that my daughter's got the killer instinct to make things happen." Applause followed like a reflex. All eyes turned toward Chloe, soaking her in like she was the sun itself. Her smile was perfectly rehearsed, just wide enough to look humble, just sharp enough to remind you she'd won. When the clinking of glasses faded, I cleared my throat. I had something too," I began, my voice already feeling too small for the room. "I was published this week in the National Security Review." The words hung in the air for less than a heartbeat. My father's gaze flicked toward me, the faintest crease forming between his brows. Then, as if remembering a polite obligation, he gave my arm a quick pat. "That's nice, sweetie, all that reading of yours," he said, his smile already drifting back to Chloe. "But Chloe's out there in the real world, making things happen." Her smirk from across the table was almost imperceptible, but I caught it, like the glint of a blade in the dark. I forced a polite smile, but inside, something shifted. The ledger in my mind, my running tally of every slight, every dismissal, gained a fresh entry. My science fair project he missed for her soccer game. The scholarships I had to hunt down alone, while money was tight, except when it came to her new car. The way he'd toast her triumphs but skim over mine like they were polite footnotes. The conversation drifted back to real estate numbers and market trends. I let my fork rest on the edge of my plate. My ears buzzed faintly, not from anger, at least not the kind that burns hot and fades, but from something colder, a recognition. I wasn't going to win here, not in this room, not in this world they'd built, where worth was measured in dollar signs and visible victories. That night, long after the dishes were cleared, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. In my other world, the one they never asked about, men trained to end wars listened when I spoke. But here, at this table, I was just the quiet daughter with all that reading. The contrast was too sharp to ignore, and though I didn't know it yet, this was the night the clock started ticking toward the moment I would make them see me. If my family's dining table was a stage for performance, my other world was the antithesis of theater. No applause, no showmanship, just precision and purpose. Deep in a windowless operations room inside the Pentagon, the only light came from the cool glow of a massive multi-panel screen. Rows of Intel maps, shifting satellite feeds, and encrypted chat streams painted the walls in shades of blue and green. The air was dry, filtered, and faintly metallic, the kind of atmosphere that made time feel suspended. Here, I wasn't Sweetie or the quiet one. I was Raven, senior intelligence analyst for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Every move I made, every sentence I spoke, was weighed, considered, and carried consequences far beyond this building. On the screen, half a world away, a Tier 1 Special Operations Unit sat in a dusty, dimly lit safe house. Their faces were hard from months in the field, eyes narrowed in focus. Among them was my husband, Leo, Ares to his team. His voice had that steady, command-layered calm I'd come to know as the sound of men ready to move. "Raven," he said, "go ahead." My hand rested on the edge of the briefing table, fingertips brushing against the smooth lacquer, grounding myself. "We'll be leveraging their confirmation bias," I began, my tone clipped and deliberate. "The primary target profiles as a textbook narcissist. We give him an illusion of control, let him believe our move is his idea. Ares, your team is the kinetic element, the fist. My intel will guide that fist to the target, and my intel will bring you home." There was no smirk from across the room here, no dismissive pat on the head. Just silence, then the sharp sound of Leo's voice. "Copy, Raven. We move on your word." The respect was wordless, but absolute. In this world, my value was measurable in lives saved, missions completed, threats neutralized. I didn't need to fight for space at the table. They made room for me because they trusted me to keep them alive. It was a stark, almost cruel contrast to my family's version of reality. They didn't know this Raven existed. They couldn't imagine it, and even if they could, they'd find a way to diminish it. That's the irony of living between two worlds, one defined by optics, the other by results. The dinner table taught me I'd never earned their approval. The ops room reminded me I didn't need it. And one day soon, those two worlds would collide. The night my father died, the house was unnervingly still. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed hesitant to tick. The kitchen smelled faintly of leftover coffee and wilted flowers, from neighbors who didn't know what else to do. I sat on the living room sofa, hands wrapped around a cooling mug, letting the silence settle over me like a heavy blanket. That was when I heard it, a low, urgent murmur filtering through the half-closed door to my father's study. Chloe's voice. I rose quietly, moving toward the doorway until the words sharpened into focus. "The will hasn't been read yet, but if we position my statement right, it'll be clear who should oversee the estate. I can't risk her making a scene," she whispered. The tone was razor-edged, the kind she used in real estate closings when she was about to corner someone. I didn't need to hear more. The rest would be predictable. She'd spin herself as the responsible daughter and me as the fragile, bookish sibling, too emotionally unstable to be trusted. It was an old play. This time, though, I wasn't just a player in her script. I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, the cool air brushing over my skin. A quiet certainty settled in my chest. Chloe wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a hostile actor. I'd learned in my professional life that when you identify a threat, you neutralize it before it gains ground. That night, I didn't feel grief so much as a cold, analytical clarity. I mentally flipped open the ledger in my mind, finding the newest entry. Attempted character assassination, family. My fingers curled loosely around the mug, the porcelain pressing a faint chill into my palms. I already knew the arena she'd choose, the memorial service. Public enough for her to play the grieving star, private enough for her to manipulate the narrative among my father's powerful friends. She'd expect me to stumble, to break, to give her the footage she needed. Instead, I began thinking in terms of assets, positioning, timing. The service wouldn't be an ambush. It would be a controlled operation, on my terms. Later, in the dim light of my hotel room, I opened my secure laptop. The cursor blinked at me like a waiting heartbeat. My fingers hovered before typing in the secure channel, "Initiate Raven's Nest." No family fight, no tearful confrontation, just a mission. And Chloe had no idea she'd already stepped into the battlefield I knew best. Leo picked up on the first ring. Even from thousands of miles away, his voice was the same, steady, clipped, carrying the weight of someone who dealt in absolutes. I need a domestic contingency, I said, my tone stripped of anything personal. Protocol Raven's Nest. There was no pause, no request for clarification. Copy Raven, what's the op? I outlined it with the precision of a mission brief, the date, the location, the layout of the memorial hall. Civilian environment, no uniforms, no weapons displayed. Their presence would be purely psychological, an invisible force until I chose to make it visible. They'll be your eyes and ears, Leo said, already sliding into his role as commander. Low profile, dispersed, awaiting your signal. After the call, I cleared the clutter from my desk and opened the memorial venue's floor plan on my laptop. I studied the angles the way I'd study a target compound. Entrances, exits, choke points. The floral arrangements and seating charts weren't decoration, they were cover. I marked the key positions where each man would stand or sit, ensuring clear sightlines to me and to each other. In my mind, the service became less a family gathering and more a stage with controlled lighting and designated cues. Chloe thought she was bringing a hidden camera to capture my humiliation. I was bringing 12 highly trained operatives to capture her in a moment she couldn't undo. I sent the final plan to Leo through our encrypted channel, adding small personal notes, names of guests to watch, people who might align themselves with Chloe, blind spots in the crowd's attention that could be turned to our advantage. The rest of the night was spent in quiet, methodical preparation. My dress for the memorial hung on the closet door, black, understated, but cut in a way that made me look like I belonged at the center of any room I walked into. Every choice was deliberate, hair neat but severe, makeup minimal but camera-ready. If Chloe wanted a performance, she'd get one, but not the one she scripted. Lying in bed later, the darkness felt calm, almost protective. This wasn't about revenge, it was about control, about making sure the narrative belonged to me before she could twist it into something unrecognizable. By the time I closed my eyes, the positions were set, the plan airtight. The next move would happen in the open, in front of every person who had ever believed her version of the story. And when it did, there would be no going back. The memorial hall smelt of lilies and polished wood, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes and skin. Soft light poured in through the high windows, catching the gilt edges of framed photographs of my father, frozen moments from a life he'd curated for public consumption. Rows of chairs faced the podium at the front, and as people filtered in, low murmurs blended into a muted hum. Chloe moved through the crowd like she owned the place. Her black dress was perfectly tailored, her hair styled in loose waves that bounced just enough to look effortless. She accepted condolences with a tremor in her voice and a sympathetic tilt of her head, as though she'd been rehearsing this role for weeks. Every so often, her eyes flicked toward me, measuring. I sat near the front, my posture straight, my expression neutral. The team was already in position, scattered throughout the room in dark, well-fitted suits, indistinguishable from other attendees. They were reading the room without seeming to, tracking every movement, every subtle shift in tone. To anyone else, they were just well-dressed men paying their respects. To me, they were a loaded weapon with the safety on. Halfway through the service, my phone buzzed in my lap. The screen lit up with Leo's name. "Don't react. Your sister is recording you." I didn't need the warning. I already knew. The camera lens would be hidden, maybe in her clutch, maybe in the button of her coat, but the intent was obvious. She wanted a moment of weakness, a crack she could capture and replay until it became the truth. I took a slow breath, eyes fixed on the floral arrangement at the podium, and typed a single word: Raven. The send button made a soft click, almost swallowed by the silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The officiant's voice droned on, his words blurring into the background. Then Leo stood. No rush, no announcement, just the fluid motion of a man rising to his full height. Across the aisle, another man followed, then another, and another. In less than 5 seconds, 12 men were on their feet, spaced throughout the room, but perfectly synchronized. Feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped loosely behind their backs. Not military parade rest, something subtler, yet unmistakably disciplined. A ripple moved through the audience. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The officiant faltered mid-sentence, his voice catching. All eyes shifted, away from the podium, away from my father's portrait, until they landed on me. Chloe's phone slipped from her hand and clattered against the marble floor, the sound sharp in the stillness. She stared at me, her expression a kaleidoscope of disbelief, confusion, and finally, fear. I didn't smile, I didn't move. I simply met her gaze, holding it long enough for her to feel the weight of what she'd just stepped into. This wasn't a game, and she wasn't the one in control anymore. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw our mother freeze, her lips parted. Her gaze darted between me and the men standing at silent attention. There was something in her eyes, a dawning recognition that perhaps she'd never really known me at all. 2 precise steps brought Leo to my side. He didn't touch me, he didn't need to. His presence was enough. He looked out over the stunned room and spoke in a voice low enough to keep its calm, but strong enough to reach every corner. We're here to pay our respects to a patriot's family. The meaning was clear. We are with her. The silence after was electric. No one looked at Chloe now. No one offered her comfort. The axis had shifted, and she stood on the wrong side of it. The officiant cleared his throat and stumbled back into his script, but the service had changed. The air felt different, charged. Every whispered conversation was about me now. Not the quiet, bookish daughter, but the woman who commanded silent warriors with a single word. When the service ended, Chloe and our mother slipped out quickly, avoiding eye contact. The crowd parted for them, not out of deference, but because no one wanted to be caught in their orbit. I stayed, speaking briefly with my father's colleagues, many of whom approached with a newfound respect. A retired general took my hand, his grip firm. "Eris," he said, voice low, "your father never told us. He would have been proud." I gave him a small, sad smile. Maybe he was right, maybe not. But the truth was, his words weren't for my father. They were for me. The ledger in my mind, the one I'd been keeping since that dinner years ago, had one final entry now. Balance paid in full. 6 months passed, each day building further distance from the shadows of my old life. My mornings began in a corner office high in the Pentagon's inner rings, where sunlight spilled through reinforced glass and reflected off the polished brass nameplate on my door. Dr. Eris Thorne, Director, Strategic Analysis, Special Projects. The conference table that stretched across my office was rarely empty. Generals, admirals, and senior intelligence officials filled the seats, their eyes steady on me as I mapped out threats and strategies that could alter the global balance. In this room, there was no question of whether I belonged. My authority wasn't defended, it was assumed. Leo often met me after briefings, leaning casually against the corridor wall, hands in his pockets but eyes warm with pride. We didn't need to speak much. Our partnership had been forged in fire, built on an unshakable trust that no amount of familial disapproval could fracture. He'd been there in the hall that day, silent and immovable, and the image still anchored me whenever I felt the weight of old wounds. One afternoon, as we walked toward the elevator, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a secure message from my deputy. Instead, I saw a name I hadn't thought about in weeks, Chloe. The message was short. "Eris, I'm sorry. Can we please talk?" For a moment, I stared at the words, waiting for something, anger, triumph, maybe pity, to stir. Nothing came. It felt like reading a memo meant for someone else's life. The pull she once had, the gravity that kept me circling her orbit, was gone. I pressed and held the message. My thumb hovered for a second before I tapped Archive. The thread disappeared into digital storage, out of sight and out of mind. Leo noticed the flicker of movement in my hand. "Something important?" he asked. I shook my head, a faint smile touching my lips. "Not anymore." He returned the smile, understanding without needing more words. We stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a soft hiss. As the floor numbers ticked down, I thought about the version of family my sister believed in, defined by blood, reinforced by control. I had learned something different. Family was whoever stood with you when the world was watching, the ones who would rise without hesitation at a single word. The elevator doors opened and Leo and I walked out together, side by side. The ledger was closed. My peace was earned, and I would never look back. Some battles are fought in the open, with raised voices and obvious blows. Others are won in silence, through preparation, discipline, and the strength to hold your ground without flinching. Eris's story is a reminder that loyalty is not measured by bloodlines, but by the people who will rise for you when it matters most. Courage isn't always about charging forward. It's about standing firm, even when those closest to you try to push you down. And truth, once revealed, has a quiet power that can dismantle years of lies in a single moment. Her journey from being dismissed at her family's table to commanding respect in the highest halls of power shows that we define our worth, not those who refuse to see it. She didn't fight fire with fire. She chose precision over chaos, dignity over drama, and in doing so, she rewrote the narrative that had trapped her for years. Loyalty from her true family, the SEAL team, her husband, her professional community, became the shield that no amount of manipulation could pierce. The lesson is clear. Surround yourself with those who stand by you without condition. Prepare for the moments that test you, and never surrender your story to someone else's script. Blood may connect you by chance, but loyalty, courage, and truth are the ties that make a family. In the end, the most powerful statement you can make is to live so fully in your own strength that you never need to look back for validation.